Spencer Stuart is our books expert here on North by Northwest. He comes in every once in a while to talk about a notable anniversary in the publishing world. At this time, it's the 50th anniversary of 84 Charing Cross Road by Helene Hanff. It's an epistolary memoir, a true story told in letters.
It's based on a series of letters that sort of tell a story of a correspondence between Helene Hanff and Frank Doal, who was the book buyer for Marks and Company in London, England.
And what was the subject of these letters back and forth? What was the main focus of the correspondence?
Well, it was a correspondence between Helene and Frank about purchasing books. She would send orders from New York, but it blossomed into a friendship. And as you see in the book, it starts to connect with actual staff in Marks and Company as well, as she starts to sort of correspond further and further with Frank. And it turns into this extremely intimate and kind of beautiful moment of about 20 years between 1949 and 1969 of the correspondence between Helene and basically, begins with Frank, but the whole staff of Marks and Company. To sort of begin the story, though, you have to sort of start with Helene's life, and that really does shade the way in which she corresponds with the staff at Marks and Company. She's born in the Depression, 1916, in Philadelphia. Her father was an aspiring theater actor. However, he became a salesman to make ends meet. And in 1936, she moved to New York City to try her hand at being a playwright. And as she says, she arrived, and within 18 months, she'd stayed in 11 apartments. She'd sort of been back and forth and trying to make ends meet. She was a secretary for a period of time. Then she was a script reader. And then she finally landed a job writing scripts for television. This was before television sort of moved over famously in the 60s to L.A., where the weather was better and there were studios all over the place. And that's the period of time in which she starts her correspondence with Frank Doal and the staff of Marks and Company. Is around 1949 when she's starting to make a little bit of money and is starting to be interested in building a library. She only had 1 year of college, but in that 1 year she became, totally fascinated with the history of Western literature. And so the asks from the various letters that she sends Frank reads similar to a who's who of Western literature.
Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, she picks up Tristram Shandy, the Grolier Club's version of the Bible. I believe there's some Bronte in there as well. There's a list online that someone's compiled of the various things that she asks. And I think there's some underlining in the actual novel itself, or rather the exchanges, to get a sense of what she was purchasing in those correspondences.
Does she ask advice from him as well?
Not so much. It's interesting that the exchange is very formal on Frank's end, and extreme. It gets more and more casual and more, shall I say, New York on Helene's side. She's calling him Frankie as he continues to refer to her as Mrs. Hanff. We've been able to procure this and that, and she said, "Oh, thank you, Frankie." It's and that part. By the end of it, you're just sort of laughing out loud at the way she's addressing him. It's really quite extraordinary. And another thing that's so interesting about the exchange is that she starts to actually send them food packages. So she had a friend who was from New Zealand who lived in New York, and this expat had a mother who lived in London, and of course this is post World War II London, so there were still rations, yeah. And so this friend had a contact for a food service based out of Denmark that would bring in eggs and dairy and all this sort of stuff, and so she started sending these to the store itself. Which is really kind of incredible. You start to get in the letters, someone, a secretary writing from Marks and Company saying, "By the way, we got your package, unbelievable." And so it sort of builds out from there. It becomes somehow more than just books, Certainly books facilitate the initial introduction, but then it starts to connect into people's lives in a very real way.
What a lovely connection.
Mm-hmm.
Did they ever meet?
They didn't, unfortunately. Not to spoil the ending, but Frank Doal unfortunately passes away in 1968 from complications due to appendicitis. This is what actually spurs on Hanff to put together the book. At that point, she had written 20 plays. None of them had sort of caught on. And so she's still writing scripts for television and doing proofreading and all that sort of thing. She gets the news in 69 from one of the co-workers. And this is sort of an interesting turn in the whole history of it. Back to the comment about 18 months, 11 apartments. Hanff never kept anything. The only thing that she kept, though, were the correspondences between herself and Doal. And the reason for that was because of her accountant. Her accountant said that, this is a reference library. You should keep your exchanges and all of your transactions with this group because you can write off the expense as an expense. And so when she heard the news, she went to her library and she'd kept all the correspondences in the books themselves. She compiled them together and she went to the publisher, Grossman Publishing, and they put together the book. And from that publishing, which was almost an immediate success, in 1971 they made a UK edition, and that actually allowed her to travel there. She met the family of Frank Doal, who knew her, of course, because he was coming home with these care packages at a time of need. And so they got to correspond and spend time together. And unfortunately, by the time she got there in 71, Marx & Company had already closed down.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so 84 Charing Cross Road as a store itself was no longer there. There were still bookstores in and around the area. However, that store was disbanded. Frank was the major buyer for that store. And so he was sort of the lifeblood. And this happens a lot with specifically rare bookstores, is that, if there isn't someone to pass on the tradition then, and those connections, obviously, they basically sort of wither. So that was actually how she got a chance to get there in the first place. And subsequently, she had the chance to actually visit quite a few other times. In 75, they made a TV play through the BBC. And then in 81, there was an actual stage play made of 84 Charing Cross Road, which debuted in New York, but also had showings in London. And that's actually at the point where the idea of making it into a feature film starts. So it's believed that probably Anne Bancroft saw the showing of it in New York and told her husband, Mel Brooks, about it. And Mel Brooks purchased the rights in roughly 1985. And from there, they developed the movie, which came out in 1987 with Bancroft playing Hanff and Sir Anthony Hopkins playing Frank Doal.
That's the only knowledge I have of this, is having seen that movie.
That's
I've
right.
never read the book. And
interestingly enough, Hanff was invited to the premiere of it, and she actually met the Queen in 1987. So from this beginning of 1949 all the way on, it's sort of an extraordinary 40 years of letters into a book and then into plays and then into a movie.
It's so interesting because, as you mentioned, there she was wanting to be a playwright and trying and nothing was catching. And then this correspondence became the thing that made her success.
Yeah, and I think it's her at her most honest. That's an interesting sort of element of it. I haven't actually had a chance to find any of her proofs of her plays. Her manuscripts and her archives are at Columbia University, but they take up only 2 archival boxes. It's not extensive. She really wasn't joking when she said she threw everything away. There wasn't very much there. And so, I think that there is a generous element about her, and I think there's also that element of growing up in the Depression. She understood scarcity, and she understood that, you needed the bare necessities in order to keep going. And in this case, it was the bookstore, which she talks about books extensively in her letters about how they give her sort of vital force and keep her going. And you can imagine her sort of reading television scripts on one day and then reading the classics to sort of keep her entertained and engaged with literature. So it really did. It kept her going. Yeah.
It seems an unlikely recipe for success too, doesn't it? A collection of letters about books. I mean, at the essence of it, Why do you think, you mentioned the honesty, what is it about this correspondence that is so compelling? Do you think that it has had all these different lives?
Yeah, I think because they're in many ways at odds with one another, Doal being very formal and Hanff becoming more informal, more casual about it, it allows for you to clearly see the development of the relationship. And in that, those opposites, there's a certain attraction that you find in it, and you just find them sort of needling, she's needling him a little bit, and she's curious as well. I mean, she was working very hard, and I don't think she really connected with a lot of people around her, but she certainly connected with books, and these people were her people. And so, these letters have a certain, reaching across the pond element to them. She was really totally fascinated with British culture. And you see that in her visit in 1971. It resulted in a book called The Duchess of Bloomsbury Street. And it basically relays her surreal experience of finally getting to London after 20 years of correspondence. And you find someone who is absolutely fascinated with the world, particularly kind of a Victorian world of London. But, even at that time in the 70s, it would have still been there in some ways, and the architecture and things like that. And so you get a kind of romantic idea with her that she really wants to keep going, and she does it in such a vivid way, I think.
Where did her collection go?
I've been trying to sort this out. There was a catalog made of her library. It was a limited run, this book, and I've had difficulty sort of tracking it down. The closest one is the University of Western Washington. So hoping to maybe stop down there and see a copy of it. And I know from reading the kind of description, the summary of the book, there's mention that some of the copies that were referenced in 1984 were not there when she passed away in 1997. So I'm not entirely sure. Columbia talks about having her papers, but they don't talk about having her library. So I'm wondering if perhaps it was, sold off when she passed away. I find that surprising because it became such a famous collection, even if it was, second editions and not particularly valuable in the rare sense of books, but certainly the association would have been something to keep together. So to be continued. I'll let you know when I track them down.
Another of the questions you always have.
Absolutely,
right?
It seems absurd that they wouldn't be kept together. I would, and it seems like she annotated as well and wrote notes, and she was an avid reader and a close reader.
In the books, there'd be
there's comments about her making notes and underlining things. So I will I'll let you know when I track them down. Yeah.
That's our books expert, Spencer Stuart, and this morning talking about the 50th anniversary of the publication of the book 84 Charing Cross Road. And he has a series coming up as well. Spencer is a wealth of information about books and publishing and collecting, because part of what he does is help people manage their collections of things. So he has a series coming up at the West Vancouver Art Gallery the first 3 Saturdays in February, starting at 2 in the afternoon, and it's titled Life Cycles, Collecting and Collections. It will focus on collecting art, whether that be prints or photography or painting, and on building private libraries. So there is a link as well that I'll put out that you can find out more information on that. And it's the first 3 Saturdays in February at the West Vancouver Art Gallery, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Join Spencer Stuart for Life Cycles, Collecting and Collections.